I found two armed HOA cops standing in the middle of my vineyard at sunrise. Problem is, I'm not in their HOA, not even close. 3 days later, drones appeared over my house. Then came the hacking attempts, and a fake sheriff named Greg swearing he had jurisdiction over my land. So I set a trap, one built specifically for his ego, and when Greg showed up screaming, slicing open a bag he swore was full of drugs, it exploded in his face. That's when the handcuffs finally came out. Sunrise has a particular way of touching my land, slow, warm, almost apologetic, like it's stepping softly through the vines so it doesn't wake anything before its time. That morning was no different. The sky was a quiet wash of gold, and the rows of Cabernet leaves shimmered with dew that looked like someone had dusted the world with broken glass. It was peaceful, the kind of peaceful a man learns not to take for granted once he's lived long enough. I'd just finished tightening the trellis wire along the south row, listening to the soft crackle of dry earth waking under my boots, when I caught something out of place. A shape. Two shapes, actually. Dark silhouettes standing dead center in my vineyard, as if they owned the place. At first, I thought maybe they were hikers lost off the trail, or some early morning birdwatchers who took a wrong turn. But hikers don't move like that, like they're clearing corners. And birdwatchers sure as hell don't carry sidearms. I froze there for a moment, one hand resting on the post, letting my eyes adjust. Two men, matching uniforms, dark navy, not quite police, not quite security, guns on their hips, cheap holsters, straps positioned the wrong way. And on their sleeves, the stupidest thing I've seen in all my years. A patch shaped like a badge, except instead of a star or an eagle, it had a little printed pine tree and the words, Lakeside Bluffs Community Enforcement Unit. Community Enforcement Unit. I almost laughed. Instead, I felt my jaw tighten. Because Lakeside Bluffs, the HOA those patches belonged to, sat a quarter-mile down the road, tucked behind its perfect wooden signs and its pastel houses and its strict bylaws about garage paint color. My land wasn't part of them, had never been, and never would be. I stepped forward, boots crunching softly in the dirt, and the two of them finally turned as if noticing me for the first time. One lifted a clipboard. The other adjusted his belt like he wanted me to see the gun he probably wasn't even certified to carry. "Morning," the tall one said. Sunglasses, square jaw, hair trimmed military short. Except his stance was wrong. He was leaning too far forward, knees stiff. A man might read that as confidence. I read it as someone trying to look like something he wasn't trained to be. "What are you doing on my land?" I asked. The tall one smiled the way someone smiles when they think paperwork protects them. "Routine perimeter inspection," he said, "part of the HOA safety initiative." I stood there a second, letting the words settle like smoke. Then I did laugh, quiet, genuine disbelief. "This land isn't HOA," I said. "Never has been, never will be." The two exchanged a look, not the embarrassed kind, no. It was the kind men share when they think the person in front of them doesn't understand how the world really works. "Sir," the tall one said again, "your property borders the community. That grants us secondary jurisdiction for safety reviews." "Secondary jurisdiction," I repeated. "Is that what they're calling trespassing these days?" His smile faded, but his partner stepped forward, tapping a button on the chest of his vest, like he was activating a body cam. Except the body cam was off-brand, strapped on backward, and had a blinking red light that meant it wasn't recording at all. These men weren't cops. They were actors who didn't know their lines. I felt something old in me stir, something I thought I'd hung up years ago. The part of me that used to walk into rooms full of people lying to my face and had to figure out who was going to make the evening news and who was going to make court in the morning. I didn't introduce myself, didn't tell them who I used to be, didn't need to. I simply pointed toward the gravel drive. "Out," I said. "Now." The tall one blinked, surprised I wasn't playing whatever little authority game he expected. "Sir, refusal to cooperate could—" "Out," I repeated, this time sharper. He opened his mouth again, but I stepped forward first. One slow step. The kind that says this conversation just ended. Both men hesitated. Then, finally, they turned and walked off my property, muttering something about documentation and non-compliance. When they reached the road, they paused, as if waiting to see if I'd look away. I didn't. Not until they were gone. I exhaled slowly. In my lifetime, trouble rarely announces itself with sirens. It arrives quietly. Soft steps, forced smiles, men pretending to be something they're not. And as the sun reached over the treetops, warming the tops of the vines, I couldn't shake the feeling that those two weren't the beginning of something. No, they were the warning, the first ripple before the storm. I didn't expect to see those fake cops again, not so soon at least. But trouble doesn't like to travel alone. It brings friends. And it brought me one in particular. 2 days after the inspection, I was tightening a wooden brace near the front gate when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Slow, heavy, too heavy for a sedan, too slow for delivery trucks. That left one thing, someone trying to look important. I straightened up, wiped the dust off my palms, and watched an aging silver Tahoe crawl to a stop just outside my property line. The engine stayed running. The driver door opened with that creak older American SUVs make when they have lived through a few too many summers. A man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, built like someone who had once been in shape and refused to admit he wasn't anymore. Aviator sunglasses, jacket with a faded sheriff's department patch still clinging by 2 loose threads, as if the jacket itself couldn't decide whether to retire. He didn't look at the Vineyard first. He looked at me. The kind of look a man gives when he's gauging whether he should try intimidation or skip straight to domination. He walked toward the gate with a deliberate heaviness, boots thudding in the dirt. Halfway there, I noticed something telling. His right hand hovered near his hip every few steps. Old habit, cop habit. Except the way he held that hand, it was all wrong, too stiff, too rehearsed, like a man trying to remember a role he hadn't played well, even back when he still had a badge. "Morning," he said, stopping just short of the fence. His voice was gravel wrapped in smoke. I nodded. "Help you with something?" He smiled, thin, crooked, like he'd practiced it in the rearview mirror. "Name's Greg Wallace. I'm the community enforcement captain for Lakeside Bluffs." I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him, letting the title sit there long enough for both of us to taste how ridiculous it sounded. "Community enforcement captain," I repeated, keeping my face straight. "That's something they print on business cards?" His jaw twitched, just a little. I'd struck a nerve, which told me something more useful than any introduction he could have given me. He cleared his throat. "Your land borders our community. That places you under secondary HOA jurisdiction in the event of an emergency or safety concern." There it was again. Jurisdiction, the favorite word of men who no longer have any. "My land isn't HOA," I said calmly. "Not yours, not anyone's. Never has been." Greg leaned forward slightly, one hand resting on the metal gate like he might just push it open if he felt inclined. "You're close enough," he said. "Close enough that what happens here affects us, which means I get to take a look around when I need to." I stared at his hand on my gate before meeting his sunglasses square on. "That gate doesn't open for HOA fantasy titles," I said. "Only real law enforcement." He didn't like that. His mouth twitched, his shoulders tightened. He straightened his jacket like he used to do before stepping out of a patrol car, except this time, there was no badge, no authority, just muscle memory and a bruised ego. "You refusing an official safety inspection?" he asked. "I'm refusing a man in knockoff authority gear pretending to have power on my land," I replied. For the first time, Greg pushed his sunglasses up onto his forehead. His eyes were pale, sharp, and angry, the kind of angry that didn't come from this moment alone. The kind of angry that lived in a man long before he ever stepped foot on my property. I'd seen that look before, in interrogations, in interviews, in men who felt the badge slipping out of their hands and couldn't accept the loss. He exhaled through his nose. "Fine," he said, "but if something happens out here, anything, you remember I tried to keep things safe." "Safe for who?" I asked. He didn't answer. He turned, walked back to his Tahoe, and climbed in without another word. The door slammed, the engine revved, and the tires spat gravel behind him as he drove off faster than a man needing to prove a point should. I stood there a long minute after he left, hands resting on the gate. I'd dealt with liars, bullies, manipulators, and wannabe heroes in my time, but there was something different about Greg, something unhinged just beneath the surface. Not stupidity, not incompetence, something else. A man who lost real authority, and had found a new playground to pretend he still had it. And I had the unsettling sense, deep in my bones, that Greg Wallace wasn't finished with me, not by a long shot. Greg didn't come back the next day. He didn't have to. Men like him don't knock twice. They let the echoes do the work. 2 mornings after his little visit, I was fixing the hinge on my workshop door when a sheriff's cruiser rolled slowly up my driveway. The sight of a real patrol car didn't bother me. Law enforcement had been on my property plenty of times over the years, usually for a glass of water or a lost dog report from a neighbor. But the way this one stopped, the way the officer stepped out with his shoulders already dropped and an apologetic look already forming, told me this wasn't a social call. He adjusted his hat, cleared his throat, and said, "We got a report about a possible weapons violation on the premises." I stared at him a moment. On my premises? He nodded like a man walking into a conversation he'd rather not be having. Caller said there were firearms stored in public view. Thought it might pose a risk to the neighborhood. I almost asked if the caller's name rhymed with Greg, but the officer looked uncomfortable enough already. Instead, I walked him to the workshop, pointed through the window. Inside, against the far wall, was my locked, bolted steel gun cabinet, visible only if you stood at a precise angle outside and squinted through the glass. The officer took one look and sighed. "Yeah," he muttered, "that's not a violation at all." "I know," I said. He apologized, sincerely, said he'd file it as a non-issue, said he hoped it wouldn't happen again. It happened again. 48 hours later, this time the call was about a strong alcohol odor drifting into the neighborhood. A strong alcohol odor. I live on a vineyard. Wine is literally airborne here in the summer. Same officer, more apologetic than before. We both stood in the driveway, listening to the hum of bees and the quiet of the morning, and he ran a hand over his face like he was trying to rub away secondhand embarrassment. "Look," he said, voice low, "I'm gonna level with you. Somebody's messing with you." I nodded. "I have a pretty good guess who." He didn't ask. He didn't need to. He left, rolling away slow, his tires cutting long lines in the dust. For a moment, I thought maybe that would be the end of it, that the nuisance calls were just Greg's lazy attempt at needling me, the way some men throw rocks at a fence to hear the dogs bark. But bullies with a badge, or a badge-shaped fantasy, rarely stop at rocks. They escalate. And escalation came quietly, the way trouble always seems to. I started noticing shadows where shadows shouldn't be. Footprints near the fence line. A new HOA truck parked a little too long down the road. Neighbors walking their dogs suddenly veering closer to my property, glancing at my house with an expression that wasn't quite curiosity, but wasn't friendliness either, like they'd been told a story. One where I played the villain. Then the mail started. Folded flyers slipped into my box. Printed warnings about neighborhood safety concerns. One even claimed my property had non-compliant agricultural operations. Non-compliant agricultural operations. On a vineyard I'd operated legally for years. I began documenting everything. Photos, timestamps, videos. An old habit, resurfacing like a scar catching the light. And somewhere inside me, a switch flipped. This wasn't random harassment anymore. This was a pattern. Directed. Coordinated. Intentional. Greg wasn't just poking around on a power trip. He was building something, painting a picture of me as a threat, a problem, a man who needed to be managed. Maybe he thought the pressure would make me bend. Maybe he thought enough false complaints would send me knocking on the HOA's door, hat in hand, asking how to make all this go away. He didn't know me. He didn't know that I'd spent years as a detective listening to men tell stories they hoped were believable. Stories they hoped would hide what they were really doing. Greg had that look. The look of someone trying way too hard to make his version of reality stick. And when a man like that doesn't get the reaction he wants, he doesn't back off. He doubles down. And as I walked the fence line that evening, the sun dipping behind the hills and the vines rustling softly in the wind, I felt it. Deep, certain, and cold. Greg Wallace had just gotten started. And what he wanted was control. He wasn't going to get it, but he was damn sure going to try. I've always believed every property has its own kind of silence. Mine used to sound like wind through vines, the creak of old wood, and the distant hum of cicadas. But by the end of that week, there was something else in the quiet, a feeling, like the land was being watched. Not the kind of watched where someone stands at your fence, the kind where someone is watching you, watching them. I first noticed it on a Tuesday evening, just after sunset. The sky still had a thin line of amber across the ridge. and I was carrying a coil of drip line back to the shed when something caught a glint of fading light. A metallic blink, high up. I stopped mid-step, tilted my head. There it was again. A tiny twinkle, like a star out of place. But stars don't mount themselves to a utility pole. I walked toward it slowly, boots crunching gravel, my breath calm and steady. Rage makes you sloppy, and lawyers take too long. Up close, the star resolved into a small, outdoor-rated bullet camera, mounted higher than any homeowner would bother to go. Industrial screws, cable stapled neatly down the pole, and on the side, a sticker. The same little pine tree logo I'd seen on those fake uniforms. Lakeside Bluffs Community Oversight Initiative. What a joke. I didn't touch it, didn't yank it down. Instead, I climbed the fence rail, steadying myself, and held my phone up to capture the serial number etched into the bracket. Then I stepped back, changed angles, and photographed the wiring path. Tools of my old trade. Evidence gathering. Clean, controlled, quiet. On the way back to the house, a breeze stirred the western trees, just a soft push of air, and the leaves moved just enough for me to see it. A second camera, half hidden in the branches, pointed directly at my porch. That one wasn't HOA issued. Different brand. Smaller, cheaper, private purchase. Greg's taste, no doubt. I didn't have to guess who installed it. The angle, slightly downward, wide but not too wide, was exactly how a man who had spent too many years pretending to be tactical would place a camera. I stood there a full minute beneath it, not moving, just looking straight into the lens the way you stare down a man through a two-way mirror. Let whoever was on the other side feel that. Let them feel me seeing them. A third camera showed up the next day, wrapped in a cheap wildlife tracking shell, except wildlife cameras don't aim at patios. They aim at deer trails. This one stared right at where I drink my morning coffee. 5 eyes in total. 5 tiny points of light, blinking amber in the night whenever I stepped outside. So I made a habit of it. Every night, around 9, I sat on the porch with a mug in hand. Didn't matter if it was hot coffee or cold wine. Point was ritual. I sat there, back straight, face calm, and simply looked at them. Most people are terrified of being watched, but watchers, real watchers, hate being acknowledged. It breaks their illusion of power. By Thursday, I was sure Greg was watching live feeds somewhere. Maybe his garage. Maybe a back room at the HOA office where he played sheriff after dark. Good. Let him watch. Around midnight, after one of these quiet standoffs, I went back inside and pulled up my router logs. Old habit, old instincts. At first glance, everything looked normal. My outdoor lights, my server, my phone. But buried in the list was a device with a MAC address I didn't recognize. Nothing labeled, no vendor tag, just a blank signature. It had connected for exactly 3 minutes at 2:14 a.m. And the next night, 2:16 a.m. And the next, 2:13 a.m. Consistent, patterned. Someone probing, not attacking, yet. Trying the door handle before they try the crowbar. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glow of the screen. Amateurs spy out of curiosity. Professionals spy for control. And Greg? Greg was confused enough to think he could be both. The vineyard creaked in the wind outside, vines brushing against each other like whispers. Another night, another silent challenge. And somewhere in the dark, behind a lens or a monitor, someone was watching. I closed the laptop softly. Let them watch, because the more they watched, the more they would reveal, and I was taking notes. The thing about pressure is, it rarely arrives as a hammer. Most times, it starts as a knock, or in my case, 2 knocks. I heard the first one early Saturday morning. I was out by the arbor trimming an overgrown branch when the sound echoed from the front gate. Light, polite, too polite. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked up the path. 2 people stood there, a man and a woman, each wearing the kind of pastel polo shirt only HOA volunteers or real estate agents think looks authoritative. Clipboard in hand, smiles rehearsed, feet planted just shy of trespassing. "Good morning," the woman chirped, pronouncing each syllable like she was auditioning for a commercial. "We're here conducting our routine environmental compliance review." Environmental compliance review. I almost asked if they were lost on the way to the golf course.